When Elijah turned 18, the world didn't open its arms to him. It creaked slightly, enough for him to squeeze through. A scholarship and recommendation from Miss Trina, his tireless and relentless high school mentor, secured his admission into a small but respected liberal arts college tucked into the wooded outskirts of Vermont. He packed a single duffel bag and boarded a bus alone, the pine forests lining the roads reminding him of everything he had tried to forget. He was quiet when he arrived, the kind of quiet that made others uneasy. His speech, though improved after years of therapy, still carried the tremble of past trauma. His stutter emerged when he was nervous, which was often. Most of the other freshmen arrived in cars packed with belongings and family members, laughter spilling out like perfume. Elijah stepped off the bus with silence wrapped around him like a coat. His first semester was a mosaic of discomfort. His roommate, a sophomore named Troy, played loud music and hosted parties that blurred into early mornings. Troy referred to Elijah as Forrest Gimp behind his back, a cruel twist on Elijah's quietness and uneven gait from an old injury he never talked about. Elijah pretended not to hear, but his heart catalogued every word. He spent hours in the library, buried in journals and literature, typing his thoughts late into the night. He continued to use E.J. Pine as an anonymous identity, a name born from the trees that once stood witness to his silent suffering. Under this alias, he began to write again. Stories, essays, confessions. He poured himself into every word. The nights he was locked in group home closets, the times foster fathers glared at him like he was a bill overdue. The long silences where he tried to explain his stutter and the teachers who labeled him as lazy.
His words burned across the screen like wildfire, fueled by a pain few understood, and people started reading. Not just reading, connecting. His blog posts and forum threads spread like whispers through the trauma communities, the disability forums, the poetry boards. One post titled "When Silence is Safer Than Speaking" went viral. Survivors of abuse, speech therapists, former foster youth, they all began to comment, to share, to echo his pain and resilience. He never responded to comments. He didn't have to. His silence finally was speaking volumes.
But life on campus was no triumph. The campus emptied out after spring finals, like a theater after the last curtain call. Most students returned home, their laughter and chaos fading from the dorms and quads like an echo, but Elijah stayed. He didn't have a home to return to, not in the way most students did. The group homes and foster placements he'd bounced between were long behind him. None of them places he'd dare call home. He was allowed to remain in the dormitories for the summer through a special housing program for displaced or independent students. His room, once shared with Troy and his beer-soaked air, was now quiet. Just Elijah, his notebooks, and a battered copy of The Elements of Style. The days stretched long and hot. Without classes or the distraction of campus noise, Elijah had only his thoughts to contend with, and they weren't kind. Anxiety crept in like a draft through a cracked window, especially at night. He often walked the campus paths under the canopy of stars, staring up at the trees surrounding the quad. Pines mostly, towering still and somehow always listening. By day, he worked at the library's back archives, sorting and digitizing old faculty records and forgotten manuscripts. It was monotonous work, but it paid. More importantly, it offered something he rarely had: silence without judgment. No one asked him to speak unless necessary. His manager, a middle-aged woman named Gwen, seemed to sense his need for space. She was gentle, efficient, and never once looked at him with pity. In the quiet moments between cataloging dates and scanning crumbling paper, Elijah started writing again. Real writing, not just blog posts or rants, stories, poetry, character studies inspired by people he'd met in foster care. He wrote in the back of the library, surrounded by books older than his memories, on a donated laptop that wheezed when he opened too many tabs. Still, even during summer, the shadows of Cruelty didn't entirely vanish. A small group of students also remained for summer housing, mostly athletes doing training camps and a few graduate researchers. A trio of them, Derek, Lucas and Jenna, latched onto Elijah early on, not out of kindness, but out of boredom. It started with Snickers behind him in the dining hall. Then one day in June, he returned to his dorm to find his door plastered with mocking printouts of his blog posts. Somehow, someone had discovered E.J. Pine. They highlighted the more personal lines. I used to hide in closets to escape being noticed. And the worst part of a group home is not the violence, it's the indifference. They wrote across the pages in Sharpie, "Maybe you should have stayed in the closet."
Elijah tore the pages down with trembling hands. He didn't cry, he couldn't. His eyes felt too dry for tears, like even grief had abandoned him.
The school promised to investigate, but no one was ever punished. No cameras, no witnesses, just another summer ghost that would fade by fall. So Elijah stopped going to the dining hall. He lived off peanut butter, granola bars, and instant noodles in his room. He showered late at night when the halls were quiet. He didn't write for a week after the incident. He couldn't. Every time he tried, his fingers hovered above the keyboard, paralyzed by the fear that his truth had made him a target. But Miss Trina called, unannounced, unexpected. She told him she had just reread one of his older posts, The Boy in the Broken Mirror. She said it made her cry again, even after all these years. "Elijah, they're afraid of your words because they see their own cruelty in them. Don't let their fear silence you." That night he wrote a new post, not under E.J. Pine, but under his real name. "Elijah John Morrow, this is me. Elijah John Morrow, you've read my pain. Now read my name." The post was raw, furious, trembling with the desperation of someone who refused to be invisible any longer. It gained 100 shares in 2 days, then 1,000. Survivors across the country reached out. One young man from Ohio wrote, "Because of you, I didn't go through with it last night." The floodgates reopened. Elijah began writing daily again, not just about his past, but about the present. The microaggressions in academia, the loneliness of trauma, the way institutions silenced victims by investigating quietly until no one remembered the harm.
By July, he had received an email from an independent online literary magazine offering to feature a collection of his essays. They didn't know his story. They just saw power in his words.
Meanwhile, on campus, the bullying slowed. Maybe because some of the perpetrators left midsummer. Maybe because someone warned them. Or maybe because Elijah no longer reacted the way they expected. He no longer flinched. He looked them in the eye. His silence wasn't submission anymore, it was armor. He began holding small open mic nights on Friday evenings under the old oak tree near the Arts Building. At first, only 2 people showed up, both shy poetry students with notebooks full of trembling metaphors. But by mid-August, there were a dozen regulars. And one night Elijah read aloud. He stuttered, he shook, but he spoke. The piece was called "If You Hear My Voice, Let It Be a Warning." It was not polished, not rhythmic, but it was real. It was raw, and when he finished, the applause didn't come like a burst of noise. It came like a tide. Slow, steady, unstoppable. That summer didn't fix Elijah, but it forged him. He learned that pain, when turned into prose, could become power. That silence, when chosen, could be sacred. And that the world, though still cruel, held corners of hope, places where broken voices could echo and be heard. By the time the fall semester began and the crowds returned, Elijah walked campus with his shoulders a little higher. Not because he felt safe, but because he had survived. And now he had stories to tell. In his second year, his creative writing professor accused him of plagiarism, claiming no one like Elijah could have written the pieces he submitted. The sting of it wasn't in the accusation, it was in the unspoken assumption behind it. He filed a formal complaint. It went nowhere. He was reassigned to another class, where the new professor eyed him with pity, not respect. By 20, depression had taken a seat beside him. He'd skip meals, sleep in the library, avoid the cafeteria where a group of students regularly mocked his stammer when he tried to speak in class. He tried to report them once, but the evidence was always insufficient, and the burden of proof always seemed to fall back on him. One night, after weeks of insomnia and mounting anxiety, he wrote a post titled, "The Night I Almost Gave Up." It wasn't subtle. He spoke of the pills in his drawer, the urge to vanish. He didn't name the college or himself, but the post spread fast. And for the first time the silence came back, not as peace, but as a terrifying stillness that closed in around him.
Miss Trina called him the next day. He hadn't spoken to her in months, but she'd been reading his blog in secret. She didn't scold him. She didn't beg. She just said, "If the trees could grow back after the fire, you can too."
She arranged for him to take a leave of absence. She came to get him herself, driving 9 hours through rain and snow. She didn't speak much on the ride back, but when she saw the bags under his eyes and the notebooks clenched in his arms, she knew. She let him sleep in her guest room, and during the day she made him write. Anything, everything, until the words felt like his again. Over the next 6 months, E.J. Pine's following exploded. An editor from a major literary journal reached out wanting to publish an anonymous essay. Then a podcast invited E.J. Pine to speak on trauma and survival. Elijah declined the podcast, still terrified of his voice, but submitted more essays. They accepted all of them. By the time he returned to campus at 21, something had shifted, not in the campus culture, those scars still lived in the architecture, but in him. He no longer craved validation. He carried his pain like ink, using it to write instead of bleed. On graduation day, he walked the stage to accept his degree. He didn't give a speech, but the college newspaper ran a final essay from him, under his real name, entitled "The Silence Between the Pines." In it he wrote, "Elijah John Morrow, VO. I used to think silence meant being unseen, but I've learned that silence can also be survival. And survival, when turned into story, becomes revolution." People cried. Professors he hadn't spoken to reached out. The creative writing department issued a public apology, and one of the students who had tormented him emailed a 2-line apology that he never responded to. Miss Trina was in the front row that day, clapping with tears in her eyes. She never asked him for thanks. She only smiled and said, "Miss Trina, the world's a forest, Elijah, but you're no longer lost in it, narrator. 2 VO. And as Elijah walked through the pine-lined campus one last time, he finally understood. The silence that haunted him was never empty. It was waiting for his voice, his courage, his words, and now it echoed.